Welcome, everyone. Or, I guess I should say, well, I'm talking specifically to you, really.
Yeah, the listener who actually requested today's journey.
Right. So, welcome to your custom-tailored deep dive.
Yeah.
We've got a seriously compelling mission ahead of us today.
We really do.
We're going to be exploring this remarkable excerpt from a Substack essay. It's by Dr. Jaime Hoerricks, and the piece is titled Gestalt Processing, The Long Road to Naming the Patterns.
Such a good title.
It is. And if you're, the kind of person who constantly analyzes how your own brain absorbs complex information.
Which I think most of us do to some extent.
Totally. Or if you're just endlessly curious about the hidden mechanics of human cognition, this is right up your alley.
It's a brilliant selection because we're looking at a very specific intersection of fields here.
Yeah.
Dr. Hoerricks is mapping the territory where Gestalt psychology overlaps with natural language acquisition.
Right.
And while those might sound like these highly established, rigid academic domains...
That's the jargon.
Exactly. Lots of jargon. But the actual cognitive experience being described is something every single person listening has gone through.
Oh, absolutely.
You experience it when you're, say, learning a new language or starting a highly technical job.
Or even just trying to read a dense piece of philosophy for the first time.
Yes. You feel that friction.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core premise of our deep dive today focuses on, well, a fundamental quirk of the human mind.
A really persistent one.
Yeah. The essay traces a century of researchers. So 100 years of cognitive scientists, linguists, psychologists.
All of them.
Who all kept stumbling over and rediscovering its exact same truth about how we process the world.
And that truth is the mind's overwhelming tendency to recognize patterns before parts.
Patterns before parts.
Right. We grasp the meaning of something as a complete whole long before we ever understand the individual, discrete pieces that make it up.
Right. And Dr. Hoerricks uses a beautifully evocative analogy right at the beginning to help visualize this. It's like this historical blind spot in cognitive science.
The Pluto analogy.
Yes. The comparison to the planet Pluto before the year 1930.
I love that part.
That analogy stood out immediately. But does that imply this cognitive pattern was completely invisible before researchers named it? Or just that they didn't have the categorical agreement to pin it down? Because, humans have been using language and recognizing patterns for millennia.
Right, and that's exactly the crux of the analogy. Think about it. Pluto didn't just suddenly pop into existence in 1930.
Right, it was always there.
Exactly. It was always orbiting out there in the dark. It had mass, it had gravity.
It was doing its thing.
It was subtly influencing the orbits of other celestial bodies. In fact, astronomers suspected something was out there because they could literally see its gravitational effects on Neptune.
Long before they could actually see it.
Exactly. Long before they ever built a telescope powerful enough to capture the light reflecting off it. But before 1930, the scientific community simply didn't have the tools. They didn't have the observational data or the collective agreement to point at a specific coordinate and say, that right there, that's Pluto.
So the phenomenon of recognizing wholes before parts has been operating the exact same way.
Spot on.
Across perception, across cognition, language research scholars have repeatedly glimpsed the gravitational pull of this pattern.
Yes.
It was always there, just operating in the background of human consciousness, dictating how we learn and communicate. But we're only just now really standardizing the vocabulary to name it.
Precisely, because for a long time, especially during the height of behaviorism in the mid-20th century, the prevailing scientific model was highly reductionist.
Everything's broken down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The assumption was that you build understanding from the ground up. You learn the alphabet, then you learn words, then you build sentences.
And eventually, you get meaning.
Right. It's a very mechanical, assembly line view of cognition.
Which feels so robotic.
It does. But Gestalt psychology pushed back against that, arguing that the human mind is fundamentally holistic. The whole is not just greater than the sum of its parts, it's recognized prior to the parts.
Prior to the parts.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the universality of this experience.
Yeah.
Because the essay opens by highlighting how we usually start with something we intuitively recognize before we ever learn a formal name for it.
Right.
And I know you, listening right now, have experienced this. You internalize a concept, you operate using its logic.
You can even anticipate its outcomes.
Yes. But if someone asked you to explicitly define it or draw a diagram of how it works, you'd draw a complete blank.
You have the operational knowledge without the declarative label.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is how this single phenomenon bridges three distinct fields discussed in the essay.
Perception, cognition, and language.
Right. It's not just a quirk of one isolated brain region. It's a global cognitive strategy.
Like a default setting.
Yes. In visual perception, for example, your brain processes a face as a single unified gestalt.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, you instantly recognize your friend in a crowd. You see Sarah. You don't consciously think, okay, the distance between the eyes is exactly this many centimeters.
And the angle of the jaw is roughly 45 degrees.
Therefore, this is Sarah. No, you don't do that math.
Right, you just see Sarah. It's instantaneous pattern recognition.
Exactly. And in cognition, you might deeply understand the underlying logic of a complex geopolitical argument without knowing the formal philosophical terms for the logical fallacies being avoided.
You grasp the structural integrity of the argument as a whole.
You feel that it makes sense. And in language, well, that's where the essay gives us some incredibly resonant real-world examples.
Those examples really bridge the gap between abstract theory and everyday life. Let's dive into those language examples.
Let's do it.
Because this is where the theory becomes visceral. The essay describes the experience of a phrase you heard years ago that suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, becomes crystal clear.
It just clicks.
It just clicks. Just think about the mechanics of that for a second. You can carry a sequence of words around in your memory for years.
Just sitting there, dormant.
Yes. The phonetic sounds are logged, but the semantic weight is missing. And then one day, you experience a specific event or the context aligns perfectly, and boom, the meaning arrives.
Right.
The words themselves didn't change, your vocabulary didn't necessarily change, but your recognition of the entire pattern finally clicked into place.
That sudden onset of clarity is a perfect illustration of Gestalt processing breaking through to the conscious level.
The whole finally reveals its contours to you.
Exactly. But the next example provided is arguably even more powerful for understanding natural language acquisition.
The movie quote example.
Yes. It completely amends the traditional way we're taught to think about learning language in school.
The essay mentions how a line from a film can carry immense meaning for us, long before its grammar is understood. I think about this all the time with how we consume media. You watch a classic film, say something like The Godfather, or even a Shakespeare adaptation.
Okay.
There's a really impactful line of dialogue.
Yeah.
You memorize it instantly because of the emotional delivery.
Yeah.
You might quote it at a dinner party. You know exactly what the pragmatic weight of that line is. You know the exact social context of when to deploy it to get a laugh or to sound intimidating.
Or to be dramatic. You've absorbed the complete semantic and pragmatic package of that phrase.
Exactly. You carry the deep meaning of that cinematic quote with you. But if someone handed you a whiteboard marker and asked you to draw a syntactic tree of that sentence.
Oh, forget it.
Right. If they asked you to point out the dangling participle or the dependent clause or isolate the prepositional phrase, you'd look at them like they were crazy.
You have no idea.
You don't know the parts, but you absolutely own the whole.
And the crucial point here is that you wouldn't need to know the grammar to use it perfectly. That is the essence of meaning recognized as wholes before parts. The grammatical syntax, the morphological breakdown of the verbs and nouns, those are just the constituent parts.
Scaffolding.
They are the scaffolding. But the meaning, the intended communication, is the Gestalt whole. I highly encourage you, the listener, to map this onto your own professional or academic life.
It applies everywhere.
It really does. Think about those times you grasp the vibe or the significance of a complex economic theory or a new software architecture.
Long before you had the technical jargon to explain it in a meeting.
Exactly.
You feel the structural truth of it before you can articulate the mechanics of it. It's like knowing a song is melancholic just from the chord progression before you've even deciphered the lyrics.
The pattern hits you first.
The pattern hits you first.
Yeah.
But this brings us to a really critical transition in the essay.
Yes. It does.
We know we grasp the whole before the parts, and we know we can carry these unrecognized patterns around with us.
Right.
But how does that vague, blurry gist actually solidify into deep, articulated understanding?
That's the million-dollar question.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The essay shifts the conversation toward the concept of repetition. Dr. Hoerricks brings up the idea of a refrain repeated again and again.
And this is where we need to be incredibly precise, because we have to fundamentally redefine what repetition means in the context of Gestalt cognitive processing.
Because it's usually got a bad reputation.
It does. When most people hear the word repetition, they immediately picture empty rote memorization.
Right.
They think of a parrot mimicking noises without comprehension, or the classic punishment of a student writing the same sentence on a chalkboard 100 times until the words lose all meaning.
Yeah, it's viewed as a mechanical, thoughtless loop.
Exactly.
Which is how most flashcard learning feels.
Yes. But the essay explicitly pushes back against that forming. It argues that this refrain, this echoing of a pattern, is repeated again and again, not because it is empty.
Right. It's not a glitch in the software where the brain is just stuck on a loop.
No.
It's a deliberate biological strategy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of neurobiology and natural language acquisition, what's actually happening during that repetition is profoundly active.
Active how?
The nervous system is actively arranging itself around that repeated refrain.
That specific phrasing, arranging itself around it, completely changes how I visualize learning.
Doesn't it?
It really does. We usually rely on computing metaphors. We say we're downloading information or storing a file in our memory bank or processing data.
Which is very static.
Right. Those metaphors make the brain sound like a static hard drive. But arranging itself makes the nervous system sound like a dynamic physical landscape.
Yes.
It's a topographical map that is literally shifting, carving new riverbeds, and moving Earth to accommodate the weight of a new concept. It's the body physically adapting to the shape of a pattern.
That's a highly accurate way to look at it. It's neuroplasticity in action.
Yeah.
It's a biological accommodation of a conceptual reality.
Wow.
When you repeatedly mull over that film quote, or when that obscure phrase you heard years ago keeps echoing in the back of your mind, your nervous system is literally building the synaptic infrastructure required to support the full weight of that meaning. The repetition is what triggers the neural pathways to strengthen and stabilize.
You know, this essay is ostensibly about cognitive psychology and language research, but Dr. Hoerricks really writes with the precision of a poet.
Absolutely.
There are 3 specific phrases in this text that I just want us to isolate and really examine because they feel like massive paradigm shifts.
Let's do it.
They take dense cognitive science and distill it into something almost philosophical. The first one is just 2 words, meaning ripens.
Meaning ripens. It's incredibly layered when you think about the implications for education and self-directed learning.
It really is, because think about the verbs we typically default to when we discuss education.
Right.
We say we acquired information, we grasped a tough concept, we mastered a subject, we captured the data.
All very aggressive words.
Very industrial mechanical verbs. They imply that understanding is an instantaneous event. Like you can just reach out, grab the data off a shelf, and now you possess it.
Which we know isn't true.
Right. But the word ripens, that subverts the whole industrial model. It implies that understanding is an organic, time-dependent growing process.
Yes.
You cannot force a piece of fruit on a tree to ripen faster than its biological nature allows.
You can't yell at it to ripen.
You can't. You just have to provide the right environment, the right nutrients, and most importantly, time.
Time is key.
According to this framework, cognitive meaning works the exact same way. It needs time to mature in our neural architecture.
That organic timeline of cognition is exactly what's being highlighted. You can't hack the ripening process.
Oh, no shortcuts.
Right. You can optimize the environment, but the nervous system still requires its own internal clock to arrange itself. And that organic necessity leads directly into the next beautifully crafted phrase in the excerpt.
Which is?
The author notes that echoic traces return long after the moment that first carried them.
Oh, that's good.
Let's break that down because it requires an understanding of how human memory actually functions in the background.
Yeah, let's define echoic traces, because that sounds like a term from a sci-fi novel, but it's a real cognitive mechanism, right?
It is. In cognitive psychology, echoic memory is the ultra-short-term memory for auditory information. It's the sensory footprint left behind by a sound.
Okay.
But in the broader context of Gestalt processing and language acquisition being discussed here, these echoic traces represent the lingering semantic and structural feeling of something you experienced.
The vibe of it.
Exactly. What's being argued is that our brains are remarkably, almost stubbornly patient. They hold on to these traces.
So even if you don't get it right away.
Exactly. Even if you were completely unequipped to comprehend the complexity of a moment or a phrase when it first happened, your brain preserves the echo of its pattern.
It's like your brain is running a background script. It captures the raw data of the pattern and says, look, We don't have the neural infrastructure to process what this means right now.
But I recognize that it's structurally important.
So I'm going to hold on to this echo, and we'll revisit it periodically until the meaning has had time to ripen.
That's spot on. It's a delayed processing mechanism. The trace returns to your conscious awareness when your nervous system has finally arranged itself enough to actually integrate it.
That makes so much sense.
You suddenly have that aha moment in the shower or while driving, years after the original event, because the infrastructure is finally in place to support the Gestalt whole.
Which leads perfectly to the third and final poetic distillation from the text. Repetition stabilizes pattern.
This is truly the anchor of the entire excerpt. Repetition stabilizes pattern.
Yeah.
If we synthesize everything we've pulled apart today, the overwhelming tendency to grasp the whole before the parts, the nervous system physically arranging itself, the organic reality that meaning ripens over time, and the patience of echoic traces, it all coalesces around this single truth.
The big takeaway.
Yes. The repetition we experience in language, in our perception, in our attempts to learn complex subjects, is not a sign of failure.
It's not a sign that we're stuck in a rut.
Exactly. It is simply our mind's required natural mechanism for locking a newly formed pattern into place. It provides the structural stability required for that organic growth of meaning to finally finalize.
So what does this all mean when we zoom out and look at this text from Dr. Hoerricks in its entirety? What is the grand unified conclusion for how we understand our own minds?
The overarching theme here is that across a century of rigorous, sometimes competing research paradigms, despite massive changes in technological imaging and academic terminology, one cognitive truth remains incredibly stubborn.
And what is that truth?
Human cognition is profoundly, fundamentally driven by grasping the entire pattern before dissecting the individual parts.
Wholes before parts.
Yes. We are not computational machines that assemble isolated data points piece by piece until a high-resolution picture finally forms.
We aren't building a mosaic from the ground up.
No. We are organic, biological beings that perceive the entire whole first, no matter how blurry or out of focus it might be.
Right.
And then we utilize repetition, echoic memory, and vast amounts of time to slowly bring those individual constituent parts into sharp relief.
Understanding this provides a completely different, much more forgiving framework for your own intellectual curiosity.
It really does.
Think about your current learning journey, the dense subjects you are tackling right now. If you ever find yourself frustrated because you understand the overarching gist of a complex topic, but you lack the granular technical vocabulary to explain the mechanics, you aren't stuck.
You aren't failing to comprehend the material.
Exactly. Your nervous system is simply in the active dynamic phase of Gestalt processing. You've successfully grasped the whole. The architectural scaffolding is up.
Right.
Now your brain is just doing the quiet, necessary work of arranging itself around the pattern so the meaning can ripen.
It's a highly empowering and scientifically grounded way to view our own intellectual development. It asks us to respect the biological limits of our own processing speed. But when we look at the reality of the modern information landscape, this raises an important question, and I want to leave you, the listener, with this thought to mull over on your own.
Okay, let's hear it.
It builds purely on the source's assertion that meaning ripens and repetition stabilizes pattern. Here is the question.
I'm ready.
If our nervous systems naturally require time, echoic traces, and repetition for meaning to truly ripen, how might a world that demands instant comprehension of fragmented information be disrupting our mind's natural ability to recognize the whole pattern?
Wow. That is a heavy, profoundly relevant question to walk away with. If our biology demands time and repetition to build a Gestalt whole, what happens when our environment forces us to process endless disconnected fragments at lightning speed?
It's definitely something to think about.
That is a tension that's definitely going to stick with me. Thank you so much, listener, for bringing such a deeply fascinating, multi-layered text to the table today.
It's a great read.
Keep trusting your cognitive instincts. Give your nervous system the time it requires to ripen those complex meanings. And whatever you do, keep looking for the patterns. Catch you next time on The Deep Dive.